My favorite game series of all time is The Legend of Zelda. I've been playing that since the Super Nintendo days. I fell in love with it though when Ocarina of Time came out. However, one of the games in the Zelda series that really was one that I followed pretty obsessively through its development was Twilight Princess. And part of the reason was I was a huge Zelda fan at the time. I loved Wind Waker, I loved Ocarina of Time, and I, like many other fans, was excited to see a more realistic looking Zelda entry coming out. But at that time, in 2004, when we started to have the first trailer come out and some basic information come out about it, one feature that I see that does not get pretty much talked about by many people on Zelda forums or Zelda fan pages is something that Nintendo, it seemed like they had heavily considered implementing as a serious feature throughout the game, but somewhere early on in the development completely canceled it altogether. And in this video, I'm going to go over what that feature is and some of the differences and changes it would have offered to Zelda Twilight Princess that unfortunately never got to see the light of day. So let's take a look. The very first trailer that came out for Zelda Twilight Princess was at E3 2004, and I remember being completely blown away by that trailer and so excited for this new, as of unnamed at that time, Zelda game to come out for the GameCube. And at that time, like many gamers, I was searching all the websites and all the gaming press releases to see if there was any special information that was coming out about the Twilight Princess at that time. And one thing that stuck out to me was IGN had mentioned that they heard rumors from other people that Zelda Twilight Princess was going to have top-down dungeons. So in other words, the game was going to play like some of the older style Zelda games when you got into dungeons. And IGN further confirmed this with a secret press video that at this point in time, as I understand, has never been leaked, but it was a closed door press video that they were shown from Nintendo that basically verified that there was going to be a perspective switch when you were in dungeons. And I believe the reasoning behind this for Nintendo was it was going to allow them to basically allow you to see larger parts of the dungeon, kind of like classic Zelda games, and I assume incorporate certain puzzles and different sorts of things in the way you approach the actual dungeon overall, which I thought at that time was going to be very, very unique. And the cool thing too was, but when you got into combat, it would go back into the normal third-person perspective that you're used to. So in other words, the perspective would switch on the fly, which to me I thought was really, really cool, because I thought that that would switch up the approach to Zelda that everyone was used to in a 3D space, but also still keep it feeling very 3D, but also take advantage of some of the cool aspects of using a 2D layout like an overhead view. Now, the problem here though is there's almost no footage that I know of that exists of this. There's a piece in one of the trailers that was released at GDC, I believe, the year after, that shows that it might have been a perspective switch, but I can't confirm for certain. There are two screenshots, however, that I could find that do suggest that these were screen captures taken from what Nintendo was trying to accomplish at that era in the development of Twilight Princess. I actually pulled these from Unseen64, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about, where it shows Link's almost approaching this dungeon from a top-down perspective. However, I did dig a bit deeper to see if this was something that was talked about further in development, as I understand, I believe Nintendo scrapped this approach entirely right after 2004, because I see no more mentions that I could find online talking about this being a thing in Twilight Princess. And even further to that, I almost hear nobody in the Zelda community talking about this being a feature that was actually at one time going to be a large aspect of how Twilight Princess was played when it came to the various dungeons in that game. I actually even tried to dig deeper, and I have a old copy of Electronic Gaming Monthly. The reason this is significant was because, if I'm not mistaken, this was back in June 2005. This was one of the earliest pieces of media at that time that I found that talked about any sort of hands-on with Zelda Twilight Princess. This time they just had it titled The Legend of Zelda. There was no subtitle yet. And I read through this pretty explicitly, and there's no mention of this top-down dungeon aspect to the game. So that leads me to believe that Nintendo entirely abandoned this approach, and this was an experiment they did for Twilight Princess that, for whatever reason, they felt just entirely didn't work, or it detracted from what they were trying to accomplish for Twilight Princess. So, as it stands, this was kind of a cool piece in the Twilight Princess history that I thought was really cool, and I would even love to at least just even see some sort of prototype or beta come out of that perspective included in the game, and see kind of really how that would have played, because the way IGN described it, it sounded like a pretty cool feature that Nintendo did put a significant amount of time and thought into when designing the dungeons. And part of my motivation behind making this video is this appears to be a piece of development history that's not widely known about Twilight Princess, that I don't commonly see. And if you're like me and you're obsessed with the history of the Zelda developments, which I definitely am, I'm still sifting through some of the Ocarina of Time dumps that they had recently from that F-Zero prototype cartridge. But if you're like me, this is a piece of history that I think is very fascinating to Nintendo's approach to Twilight Princess at that time, and something that I would, again, just love to see even snippets of, or even see that closed doors DVD that Nintendo showed IGN back in 2004. So this is just a quick little breakdown of something I thought was fascinating with the history of that game's development. And if there's something else that I might be missing here, maybe there's even a piece of the history that I'm talking about regarding this top-down element that I'm missing entirely, I would love, guys, to hear about that in the comments, because this for me is something that I still find very fascinating even to this day.